Okay, so now let's talk briefly about platform security. So hardening your Liferay solution, we want to strike a balance between functionality and security. We don't want to overload one so that the other becomes cumbersome. And so there's three primary layers of hardening. You can harden your network, you can harden the server or operating system, or you can do this on your application. There's a few administration practices, and so some good rules to establish for Unix server administration include admins using their own personal user account to administrate, no root level access, use sudo only, and then you can audit administrators. If we want to strengthen the database server, we can limit access to servers. You can create a database user for Liferay that has access to only one schema and no DDL permissions. You might want to note that some upgrade routines might need DDL permissions, and so you might need another user with more permissions that's less accessible, or you might give them and revoke them. You can also disable account creation. So if registration is not required, this is especially a good idea. And you can set the following portal properties to make this happen. And so setting company security strangers to false and OpenID auth enabled false. Also, it's a good idea to change the default admin account. So when you start Liferay for the first time, a default admin user is created, but before going into production, you want to change this or disable the account. And you can do so by changing the following in portal properties. You can set the default admin password and default admin screen name, and then default admin email address prefix. There's also this thing called hashing algorithms, and you can choose from several hashing algorithms configured in portal property. And then this, you can type in passwords encryptions algorithm, and there's a few different algorithms here. Available hashing options are key derivation with hashing, so PBKDF2 shown above, you have bcrypt 10, and then UFCrypt. Other options available include MD2, MD5, SHA, SHA-256, SHA-384, SHA, and plain text. We also have auto login functionality and servlet filters. So you can disable non-used auto login functionality and servlet filters in portal properties, and this will add to your security of your application. Below, you see a list of some of the properties that you'll configure in portal properties. Also, you should remove unused OSGI portlets, and you can remove these by deleting the corresponding OSGI bundle. So these are jar files from your Liferay home/OSGI/modules. Do make sure to back up before deleting, just in case if they contain any important functionality needed for your server. Some OSGI modules are essential for minimum platform operation, and therefore they cannot be deleted. And this is also a good idea for why you want to back up. Setting password policies can also help to strengthen your application. Password policies enable the platform administrator to define the rules for passwords, and you can set what's acceptable on certain sites or for specific users. So you can use password policies to configure password changes, syntax checking, history, expiration, and even a lockout. We then have LDAP configurations, and there's basically three cases based on your configuration. The default behavior where Liferay DXP imports and stores all LDAP passwords in its database, hashing them and conforming them to its policies. You also have the LDAP password being ignored, and a new Liferay password is generated according to Liferay's DXP's policies. And LDAP, this is configured to manage password and becomes responsible for the management and storage of all passwords. Let's look at login and authentication settings. The primary configuration settings that should be considered here are 1. LDAP configuration, and we briefly looked at this, but this consists of a variety of LDAP settings, including configuration for whether passwords are stored in Liferay's database or in the LDAP. And then you also have token-based single sign-on, and this contains additional settings for LDAP and other single sign-on options. Let's look at remote access to services. The remote access to services is passed through multiple layers, and this gives additional security to your application. You have an IP permissions layer, and all requests, they must originate from an IP address that is whitelisted in portal properties, and this greatly filters out any malicious IP addresses. You can also take advantage of the authentication verification layer, and this verifies the authentication token to check if it returns a valid user. After you get past that stage, you can look at the permission layer, and you can check to see if the user has rights to perform the service. And then you have the security access profile layer. This is a whitelist of services and functionality a user has access to. We also have IP filtered servlets, and there's a number of servlets that can be IP filtered, and you can use the following properties: domain servlet hosts allowed, access servlet hosts allowed, and JSON servlet hosts allowed. To secure services, this can be approached from many levels: IP address filtering, authentication verification, user permissions, and service whitelisting. And so this is very similar to what we talked about previously. There's also a few default service access policies, and these operate like doormen at a prestigious club. So this contains a whitelist of service names and methods, and there's several default policies already in effect on your server. This is your sync default, sync token, system default, and system user password. So knowledge check. Hardening is a process of securing a system by reducing its vulnerability. You have password policies, and these allow you to enable you to define rules for what passwords are acceptable on your site. Hashing enables protection from compromised passwords. Network communication can be limited through router firewalls. The authentication verification, auth verifier pipeline, allows Liferay DXP to verify a user's identity prior to invoking a service. And service access policies contain a whitelist of service names and methods.